Hey everyone, in this video I am going to go over the response for Paradise Lost that is due on Sunday, April 11th. So for this response, select one of the topics below. Actually, I only have one topic for you. And write a 400 to 500 word response specifically answering the topic or question posed. You should give 1 to 2 cited textual examples from Paradise Lost and 1 citation from a critical database source in your response to show evidence for your argument. The specific database choice is up to you. I recommend 2 quotations from Paradise Lost. But the response should be 400 to 500 words. Let's move on to the topic. Okay. How does Milton depict the mental state of the fallen? Okay, so here is where you have a choice. Choose either Satan or Adam and Eve and explore one psychological effect of having fallen from God's grace. Questions to consider: what kinds of thoughts, feelings, and desires do the fallen have? How does being fallen from grace change the way they see God, themselves, or their circumstances? Okay. So you're going to choose, when you do this, you're going to choose one of the following sections from the epic to explore how this section presents the mental impact of losing God's favor. All right. And use 1 to 2 direct quotations from your section and a cited paraphrase from a critical article on Paradise Lost to support and develop your response. All right. So essentially, you're either going to write about Satan and focus on a quotation from this section, or you're going to write about Adam and Eve and focus on a quotation or 2 from this section. Okay. And then choose a critical article from one of the library databases, or you can use one of these links. So it has to be either a database source or a critical article from one of these links. Right. So if I open this link, for example, Paradise Lost essays. All right. So you can use one of these essays. Now, keep in mind, if you're using one of these essays, it's up to you to figure out how to do the citation correctly, right? So you may want to, go back and look at how you did the citations for the previous response for your secondary sources. The benefit of the database is that it gives you the citation, all right? So you don't have to worry about that. But these do give you some more options for your secondary source. All right. So I want to look at these sections. I'm not going to go over the whole section for you, but one thing I do want to emphasize is that we're dealing with the second edition of Paradise Lost, not the first edition. The second edition is what is in the textbook. So that is what you should be using as your source. Now, how do you know the difference between the first edition and the second edition? The second edition has 12 books. The first edition has 10 books. Okay. So make sure that you have the correct edition. Now, so this is book 1. So we're starting with line 84. Sorry, I'm bouncing around. This basically starts, to whom the arch enemy and thence in heaven called Satan with bold words, breaking this horrid silence, thus began. Okay. And this is Beelzebub who is talking here. And so, you got Beelzebub's perspective, and then you have Satan's perspective in response. And that's why I chose this section. One quotation, for example, that particularly stands out is down, sorry, it's in the 200s right here. Okay. Okay, and this is Satan, and he is discussing his fallen state, right? Starting on line 249. Farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail horrors, hail infernal world, and thou profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor. One who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. A mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. What matter where if I be still the same, and what I should be all but less than he whom thunder hath made the greater. Here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure. And in my choice, to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. So in this section, there's a lot of things that are interesting in terms of sort of understanding how being fallen from grace has affected Satan and his mental state. So, a few things that you might emphasize, this idea that, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Okay. And this idea that, in his mind, being fallen from grace provides him with a certain freedom that that he did not have before, but it's a freedom that comes at a cost, and it's a freedom that sort of presents itself in in kind of antagonistic terms, right? So so one characteristic of his having fallen is that he sort of he mentally grasps the state of being fallen as an opportunity for him to sort of redefine who he is, and to sort of take control over a situation where before he felt he had no control. Okay. One thing you should also notice here is this idea that the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven, right? And I think this is a particular characteristic of the fallen state, this idea that that now it's sort of up to the mind to and up to Satan's individual sort of perspective, that he can now sort of decide how he wants to see the world, right? But again, there is a drawback to this, right? And one of the drawbacks is that, yes, he can, he now feels he has some freedom to decide how he wants to see the world, and how, he sort of mentally can determine the value of that world. But this also makes questions of value and reality seemingly arbitrary and solitary at the same time. So if I can make, in my mind, if I can, pretend that hell is heaven, and that heaven is hell, then what exactly do those terms mean anymore, right? In a way, I am sort of trapped inside my own mind and my own perspective, because I no longer have the guidance to help me sort of determine, or to sort of the outward influence that gives my assessments of value meaning. Okay. You know, in order to make a habit of hell, he has to hail horrors, hail infernal world. You know, he has to do some mental gymnastics here to, but he can't necessarily. I mean, he basically has to embrace the horror, and so this is, you know, I think this is something that, you know, this is basically his consolation, right? This is, you know, this is the freedom that he has attained, you know, but it's one that sort of forces him to deny the reality of the world in order to assert his freedom. Okay. Now, you know, there's also a quotation from later, moving on to Adam and Eve. Okay, and so this is, you know, so Adam and Eve, book 9, lines 795 to 1045. So basically, you know, basically, if you choose to use this section for your essay, then you're focusing on Adam and Eve. This section essentially covers, you know, after Eve eats the apple and then Adam eats the apple and some of, you know, and how they react to it. But one thing you should notice is Eve initially has kind of a similar reaction to Satan, in that, you know, one of the things that she sort of recognizes is that, you know, is that she did not necessarily have, there's a certain freedom that that she has attained, and, you know, it's posed in similar terms. Okay, so you know, she believes that, kind of going up here, starting at 820, but keep the odds of knowledge in my power without co-partner. And here she's talking about Adam, you know, so she wants Adam to eat the fruit too. She wants Adam to join her in, you know, in this state. And so to add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love and render me more equal. Okay, so so like Satan, you know, her being fallen makes her more aware of a perceived injustice in her prior position. Okay, that she was less equal before. And she says, and perhaps a thing not undesirable, sometimes superior. For inferior who is free, and this is for the you know, the connection that's often made to Satan's speech earlier. This idea that being in a state of grace means accepting one's inferiority to God and to God's will, and you know, and to you know, to God's commandments. But you know, can one be free in a state of inferiority? And so so being fallen, you know, in a way, sort of, you know, in a way, this is the knowledge that she has attained through eating the fruit. The knowledge that you know, that she was because she was unequal to God and even unequal to Adam, because she was inferior, that this is a, you know, this sort of compromises her freedom, right? But again, you know, the freedom that's attained is one that, you know, like Satan's, is going to, you know, it's a solitary freedom, you know, even if she sort of brings Adam along, because it sort of renders them free within a world where a world of uncertain meaning and significance, where where God's will, where value, is no longer readily apparent, where it's open to a world that's open to interpretation, sort of the price of freedom. So instead of certainty, you have uncertainty. Instead of sort of, divine presence, you have sort of a divine ambiguity that they must reckon with. And then, okay, so going down further, one other section I think is interesting with regards to this topic is, let's see, let me make sure I'm still in this section. So down to 1045, and this is after Adam eats the fruit. Make sure. Sorry, I'm looking up in the book, so I want to make sure I've got the right lines. Okay, so yeah, 10:10. All right, so divinity within them breeding wings wherewith to scorn the earth, but that false fruit, far other operation first displayed, carnal desire inflaming. He on Eve began to cast lascivious eyes, she him, as wantonly repaid, in lust they burn, till Adam thus gan to Eve to dalliance move. So, so basically, to put it bluntly, one effect of having fallen from God's grace is they now want to have sex. So now their carnal desire has been inflamed. So one interesting approach you might take to the essay is, well, what is it about being fallen that has this effect? Like, why would being fallen from God's grace have this effect of essentially, enhancing their lust for each other, right? And why would it have this effect of, and presumably, presumably they have had sex before, right? But it's different this time. It seems, in lust they burn, right? So your essay might explore why being fallen from God's grace has that effect. Okay. So with each of these examples, what you really want to, how you want to approach it is, why does being fallen from God's grace have this effect? Okay. And then if you can answer that question, that's your thesis. So in other words, why is being fallen from God's grace, why does it have the effect of making Satan want to imagine hell as heaven and heaven as hell? Or why does it make Satan, and you can also say this about Eve, why does it make them recognize their inferiority to God and value that inferiority as freedom? Okay, and and how does that seem to affect them? Okay, and then so the section basically goes until 10:45. Okay, if you're doing Adam and Eve, and you don't necessarily have to do both, right? So you can do Adam or you can do Eve, or you can do Adam and Eve, or you can do Satan. All right, those are basically your options, right? But you're focusing on one of these sections. You're either focusing on this section, the Satan book 1, lines 84 to 330, or Adam and Eve book 9, lines 795 to 1045. All right, and then you need a secondary source. Okay, so for your thesis, identify one psychological effect of being fallen from God's grace that is demonstrated in your section. It should be something interpretive and insightful. Don't just explain how the character feels, but try to explain how that feeling is directly tied to being fallen from grace. All right. So don't just give summary, but an interpretation of why the character does or says these things. Okay. So you want to introduce and present this in your first paragraph. In the second paragraph, and this is where the organization is a bit different from before. Present your secondary source and summarize its relevant points. So you may give one quotation here from the source. At the end of the paragraph, explain how this source is relevant to your thesis. Then in the next 1 to 2 paragraphs, present 1 or 2 quotations from your section that demonstrate the effect described in your thesis. Keep quotations under 40 words. Do not give more than 1 quotation from your section per paragraph. Okay. And a few other notes. Don't begin or end the paragraph with your quotation. You need to always begin the paragraph with the context, okay, and the point you're trying to make, the claim. And then after the quotation, you give a citation and end with analysis. Like, what does it literally mean and why is it significant to your thesis? Okay, and try to focus on specific words or details in the quotation when you do that. And where you can, try to make connections to the secondary source. Okay. But when you're making a connection to the secondary source, then always make sure you refer to the last name of the author or the title of the source if there is no author. Okay. In your response with a short conclusion, explains how your thesis adds to our understanding or appreciation of the epic. You know, how does this show the epic's relevance to the reader? That's one way to think about that. And then make sure you list your works cited. It should include both Paradise Lost and your secondary source. Okay. And then the note here, the goal of the response is to better understand how Milton characterizes the psychological impact of having fallen from grace. All right. While Milton may have a moral agenda, your response should not attempt to morally judge the characters or the poem itself. Okay, do not turn your response into a religious sermon or an anti-religious sermon. Okay, discuss your subjects as literary characters whose psychological response to their traumatic experiences may represent something important about the human experience. Okay, in other words, I don't want you to use the response to sort of project your own religious viewpoint of what's happening, right? So I want you to try to understand the text on its own terms. Okay. Regardless of, you know, whether, regardless of what your specific religious affiliation is. Okay. All right. And then, you know, in terms of sources, documentation, formatting, it's the same as before, so I'm not going to go over that again, but make sure you review it. Okay. All right. So, and this again is due Sunday by 11:59 p.m. Okay. Make sure that you submit. Make sure it is submitted correctly, okay? So you should get the success banner, you should get a verification email, and you should be able to read your response in the text box within the screen in Blackboard, all right? So if one of those 3 things does not happen, then email me your response, okay, just to be safe. So that way I get it on time, all right? Again, it's your responsibility to make sure that you have submitted your response correctly and that you've submitted it on time. All right. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thank you and have a great rest of your day and weekend.